Hey, fans of freedom and open discussion, I'm heading over to Substack, and there's an ad-free audio and video version of The Adam Carolla Show that's going to be waiting there. In the near future, you'll even be able to watch ACS Live, unedited, as we record it, participate in the show via live chat. That'll be coming up very soon. You'll also get an ad-free version of the Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew Show. You'll also get an exclusive to my new podcast, Beat It Out, where I share unpolished ideas with my comedian buddies. The first series of episodes is going to be Jay Moore. You'll get all this and more for the low, low price of $9 a month, a pittance for all we're going to bring you. Subscribe now at adamcarolla.com/Substack, and I'll see all of you in our new speakeasy called Substack.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined as always by my fourth amended best co-host, Brett.
That seems like a knock. I know you're trying to tie this to the Fourth Amendment, but
no, it is a knock.
Who are your three best?
Well, I do have
the
four.
Third Amendment never gets any love. So.
The Third Amendment never gets any love. You're my fourth best co-host. You, to be fair, you're also my first best co-host, but number 2 and 3.
It's pretty bad when you're
might be nobody
only
else.
Co-host.
You are my only co-host, but you are the first and the fourth. It's really nice when I record episodes where there's no banter. People give me no 1-star reviews about banter, but they then give a lot of 1-star reviews about me being a woman. So there's
Does that happen on American Justice and City Confidential a lot?
All the time. No banter, because there is no banter, but they'll be like, the original host is a man.
It's true.
End of 1-star review.
I mean,
end of 1-star review. I'm like, your 1-star review is, I am not a man.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that. You do a great job, though.
You're so nice. You don't listen.
This is Alice's way of pointing out, once again, that she has 2 podcasts that she does without me. So... It's actually really lonely to do it without you. It's like the loneliest thing ever because I just talk to myself. So it's not fun. We're not going to do any more of those. No. But you're my Fourth Amendment loving co-host as well. We've run out of descriptors that tie back to the Fourth Amendment. But guys, the Fourth Amendment, man, there's just so much to talk about. We're just going to be back for yet another episode talking about the Fourth Amendment because it's in the news a lot, obviously. And it's important because it's in our Constitution. There will forever be case law and litigation around the Fourth Amendment because of the importance of privacy, right? I mean, we are an individualistic society and we value, the reason we fought a whole revolution was, First Amendment, sure. Speak your mind against the king, religion, but also because we believe in the right to have your own space, your own privacy, and the government doesn't just get to intrude upon it. Now, it's not as simple as that, though. The reason there's going to be litigation forever, Brett, is because government and private parties are always going to kind of have to find that line as it butts against each other. It's true. And what we're going to talk about today is an instance where the government is attempting, I think it's fair to say, to redraw this line and to push the line further back. We've been talking a lot about immigration enforcement, what's going on in Minnesota, that sort of thing. And that has brought up something that I had never really spent any time thinking about, I can say, honestly, and never really thought I would. Administrative warrants. And what is an administrative warrant? Are you all about administrative warrants?
Have you ever heard anything sexier, guys? Take a breath. Everyone breathe. Administrative warrants. I know. Gets you all hot and bothered. Well, actually, it should.
I'll say this. My wife was really excited about this.
She's an admin professor.
She's talking my ear off about them. So I learned a lot just this evening about administrative warrants. So, yeah. So I'm excited.
This is a really great point because I now deal with a bunch of administrative warrants on the civil side, because my practice is obviously much more civil oriented now than criminal. And so to deal with it on this side, I am actually really excited about this conversation as well. So don't be deterred by such a sexy word as administrative, because this is going to be a great episode, guys.
So basically what we have here, the question, and that we're going to be talking about. So as you're going to see, in order to enter a home, typically you need a warrant issued by a judge, right? I think most people know that. Well, administrative warrants aren't issued by judges. They're issued by maybe an administrative law judge, maybe a member of the organization. The administrative agency may issue these warrants. And the question is, when you have administrative warrants that are related to immigration enforcement, can you use those warrants to enter a home where you suspect or know there is someone who has a deportation order? Can you use the administrative warrant to go into the home, get that person, and then remove them? Now, typically, administrative warrants are nowhere near that exciting. They are used as part of civil rather than criminal enforcement schemes. So typically you have fewer due process rights when it comes to civil matters. So some examples of administrative warrants include like a warrant under OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to inspect a workplace, right? So OSHA can issue these warrants. They show up at maybe a factory and they say, hey, as part of our ability to regulate the workplace, we have this warrant. We want to come in and make sure you're doing everything according to the law. And if you're that workplace, you can't say, well, you didn't get a judge to do it. No, this is something you can do under administrative warrant. DEA uses administrative warrants to go in and check the books of a pharmacy, right? So, you have a business, you have your books, you might think you have some privacy in those, and you do to a certain extent. But if DEA has this administrative warrant, they can come into your pharmacy and look at your books. Another one might be agriculture, inspecting a farm, right? Or a processing facility, or like a milking, whatever we call those, right? Like these things are all regulated by these administrative agencies. Administrative agencies are given power by Congress to regulate them. And as a part of that, they can issue these warrants and they can go use them to do these things. Now, one type of administrative warrant that is relevant to what we're discussing is the I-205 warrant of deportation or removal. And you start off with a basic premise. Everyone agrees that these warrants are valid in the way that people who are in the United States illegally, who have removal orders, so who have been judged to be here improperly and can be removed, this is how you remove them. You issue these warrants, you find the person, you say, I have this, I'm taking you into custody, you're now going to be removed. There's no controversy about that.
Where there is controversy, however, is the use of these warrants to enter a home. So this implicates, of course, the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment, as you all know by now, says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. We've obviously talked a lot about what is required of a Fourth Amendment warrant for a search.
So the right of the who?
The right of the people.
People. And that's important because it doesn't say citizens, right? So this is a general right. It's not just available to citizens. It doesn't require you to be a citizen of the United States. The Fourth Amendment applies to everybody, including people who may not be here legally. And the courts have been clear about this, that at least when in the ordinary course, there are going to be exceptions, and we can talk about those. But in the ordinary course, the Fourth Amendment is going to apply to everybody. And the courts have been clear that ordinarily you need a warrant signed by a judge, which is not an administrative warrant, not an Article III judge at least, to enter a home absent exigent circumstances. So put aside exigent circumstances, which can mean all sorts of things. That's not what we're talking about right now. I just argued an exigent circumstances case a few weeks ago. Won it, because why not brag? But anyways, it was actually a really interesting case. Maybe one day we'll talk about it. But so ordinarily you need a warrant to go into somebody's home, right? And this all goes back. It didn't all go back, but a case that is particularly on point is Payton versus New York. And this is what Payton versus New York said. It is true that an arrest warrant requirement may afford less protection than a search warrant requirement. These are two different kinds of warrants. Search warrants are typically a little bit more aggressive and there's more protection and it's harder to get them. But it will suffice to interpose the magistrate's determination of probable cause between the zealous officer and the citizen. If there is sufficient evidence of a citizen's participation in a felony to persuade a judicial officer that his arrest is justified, it is constitutionally reasonable to require him to open his doors to the officers of the law. That's Payton versus New York, 445 U.S. 573. So basically, the court is saying, because it was sort of a question, like they didn't have a search warrant, they had an arrest warrant. Was that good enough to get into the house and arrest the person? And the Supreme Court said, yes, because you have this neutral magistrate who is interposed between the police and the citizen who's making the call, right? So like you can imagine if the police captain could make the call or the DA could make the call or someone else in the executive could make the call, you don't have a neutral magistrate. You have someone who's interested. You know, they have an interest in this, right? Their guys want to go arrest this guy. Sounds good to me. Here's your warrant, right? Well, you don't have that and you can't have that. So when it comes to sort of the ordinary course, you have to have a warrant to enter a home to arrest someone. That's what you have to have. That is the baseline. And it's important to remember what the baseline is because when you want to deviate from the baseline, the impetus is on you to provide sufficient reason to be able to do that. And frankly, this requirement that a judge sign a warrant is one reason that really for several decades, since back to 1980, people, officers, whoever they are, have not been using administrative warrants to go into someone's home. If it's not signed by a judge, but it's signed by an administrator or maybe some sort of administrative law judge who aren't really judges. I mean, we call them judges, but they're not judges in the constitutional sense. We have not used that as a justification for entering a home.
And this is really interesting because this has come up in some of my DEA investigations of pharmacists. And it was very clear that when these administrative warrants, my agents were very clear not to use them to even enter the pharmacy, but rather they made appointments to see the books and passed the books over to the agents to do this. That was an extra step that I remember my agents taking because they didn't want to get in trouble with the Fourth Amendment. They're like, you know what? We're not even going to like step foot into the pharmacy. We just want to look at your books. Obviously, looking at the books then led to further investigation. And ultimately, we, by the way, did get a warrant to search that pharmacy and found a ton of illegal conduct. But I remember that was something that we were very careful about because we didn't want our entire investigation to be thrown out, lest we misstep on the Fourth Amendment issue.
And if you start thinking about sort of what are some good analogies, I mean, imagine you have an administrative warrant to view their books. Presumably, and you did a lot of these cases, I didn't, but let's say DEA went in, they looked at the books, and in the books was clear evidence that the pharmacist was selling OxyContin, right? Illegally. He was basically a drug dealer with a lab coat, right? Presumably, they didn't say, well, we have this administrative warrant, so we're seizing all your OxyContin, and we're using the administrative warrant as justification to do that. Presumably, they didn't do that.
That exact thing happened. They saw it was very clear the books were cooked and the numbers didn't add up and a ton of Schedule II opioids were missing. And they went and asked me and I said, let's draft a search warrant. That's what we did in that instance. And they were sitting outside the pharmacy at that point, by the way, when this happened. By the way, this was also the pharmacist who we ended up having to move quickly on because he booked a one-way ticket to Vietnam, which doesn't have extradition. So this actually could have been one of those exigent circumstances. And still, we took the added step of drafting like a 50-page search warrant in order to go in.
And that's typically what you do. I mean, obviously there are plain view exceptions and everything, but a lot of times, like let's say you have an arrest warrant and you go in to arrest a guy and let's say you're arresting him because, you know, he had unpaid parking tickets. I don't know. And you go in and he's got a drug lab in the back. Usually what you'll do is you'll get the guy, you'll back out of the apartment, you'll go get your search warrant, and then you'll use that to go in and search the rest of the apartment for the drugs, right? That's typically what you would do. I mean, just usually the expectation is if you're going to do something that involves more than the bare minimum that the administrative warrant might allow, or even an arrest warrant might allow, or even a search warrant that doesn't include those items. Like say you're going in because you think it's a child pornographer and you have a search warrant for all their computers, and you show up with a computer search warrant and you see the drug lab, you're going to go get another warrant for the drug lab, right? It's usually very sort of narrowly cabined to protect all of these rights.
Again, because we take our privacy and kind of what belongs to each individual person very seriously. So we've just described a few examples that we've personally lived where agents take that additional step. Now, agents charged with enforcing the immigration laws, they have chafed at this requirement that they need to go get a criminal search warrant in order to enter homes. After all, immigration enforcement is meant to be much simpler than a criminal enforcement. That's not meant to be a controversial statement. It just is based on how the laws are written. There are few due process rights. No judge has to sign the administrative warrant, and you can't quash them. And removal is a civil action. It's not a criminal action. So having to get an arrest warrant implicates criminal law, which is not only more difficult because of all the things we listed out earlier, but it might even be impossible when the alien in question either hasn't violated a law, or it would be difficult to identify one separate than the fact that they are here illegally, which we've already said removal is a civil action.
Yeah, and like you can imagine, there's a couple complications here. So a lot of times we think about people who are here illegally, and we think of people who walk across the border, and that's a crime. It's called illegal entry. It's a misdemeanor. If you are removed and you come back, that's called illegal reentry. It's a felony. But not everybody who's here, in fact, a lot of people who are here and shouldn't be, didn't do that. They came over on a work visa or a student visa, and they overstayed their visa. And there's never been a criminal component added to that. There's been debate in Congress for a decade about whether or not to add it, but as you can imagine, it's Congress, so they don't get anything done. So you would have to find something else, like failure to register. There are other things in Title VIII that apply to someone who's just here and shouldn't be here, but you'd kind of have to figure it out. It's a little bit harder than just an illegal entry type thing, right? And you're trying to think of some sort of criminal action to do this, and Congress hasn't specifically given the Immigration Service the ability to seek just a probable cause warrant in general, right? Like there's nothing in the code that sort of allows that in a way that might not be tied to a criminal action. You could imagine that, and that probably would be smart to have that as part of the scheme. But it's not. We don't have that. So you have this sort of gap in the law, and you have people trying to fill it.
So this gap, of course, was that administrative warrants weren't used like search warrants until recently. So the administration has changed the policy on administrative warrants with respect to immigration. Big question. Can they do that? Now, they have a really steep hill to climb because they must establish that this is an area of the law where the rights of illegal immigrants are lesser than citizens. Now, in order to do so, the administration has pointed to a case called Abel versus United States.
And I don't know what it is about these cases we've been talking about lately, but man, these are all-timers. And this is another one. This is another all-timer case. So get ready. This is a great one. Okay. So William August Fisher was born in England, and he was the son of one of Vladimir Lenin's old buddies from the pre-Soviet Union days. And so, as you guys may know, Russian Empire, Vladimir Lenin, he was like revolutionary. He gets kicked out of Russia. All his buddies get arrested. He ends up in Germany. Well, this guy, who was one of his friends, moves to England, and he has a son there. But then, how the tables have turned, right? So they have World War I, the empire falls, the Soviets rise, and he moves back to Moscow to hang out again with his buddy Lenin. And he has this son who's sort of a genius. He's like a sort of, he's very intelligent. He knows all these languages, and very quickly he sort of rises up and becomes a member of the NKVD, which was the KGB before the end of World War II. So he's in the NKVD. Lenin's in power. Everything's great. They're hanging out with Trotsky. It's awesome, right? So then Lenin dies, right? Well, the problem is Stalin takes over, and he's not a big fan of Trotsky. He ends up killing him after Trotsky has to flee to Mexico. Read Animal Farm. There's Snowball and Napoleon and Trotsky Snowball. Anyway, then all the Trotskyists sort of fall out of fashion. And Fisher, he doesn't get shot. He avoids that in the purges, which is kind of impressive. But he does get fired. The NKVD fires him as part of the purge. He loses all his sort of perks and everything else. He's an outcast. And this is what Stalin does in basically 1937, 1938, which turns out to be a really bad idea because Stalin's firing and killing everybody who knows what they're doing. And then World War II starts. But it's fine because Stalin's with Hitler. They got a non-aggression pact. They're going to divide up Europe between them. Hitler invades one side of Poland. Stalin invades the other. They're going to split it. Yay, we're all buddies here. And then, of course, Hitler invades Russia. And when he does that, massive success in the beginning. Well, Stalin freaks out and he starts rehiring everybody he fired. Can't raise all the people he killed from the dead, but he's able to bring back a lot of people who are still around. Fischer's one of them because he's amazing. It put him in charge of sort of a lot of different areas of espionage, counter-espionage. He does a fantastic job. He's basically a hero. The KGB, which is now the NKVD, is the KGB. They're like, for all your great work in World War II, we are going to give you our prime outpost. We're sending you to the United States. So in November 1946, Andrew Kayotis arrives back in the U.S. from a visit to his relatives in Lithuania, which was weird since he died in Lithuania. But what better cover for a spy than an American who went to Lithuania and never came back? So he shows up as Andrew Kayotis. The Americans are none the wiser. He gets to New York. He then gets his full identity package. He's going to be a man named Emil Robert Goldfuss. Goldfuss had died when he was 18 months old. So we've got his full identification, and that's who he's going to be. And he becomes one of the major conduits of nuclear secrets from Los Alamos to Moscow. Because remember, the Americans invented the bomb, and it was, you talk about a game changer. When you've got the bomb, you can do anything, right? And the Russians really needed it because they're in the middle of a Cold War with the Americans. And if the Americans have the bomb, how can you oppose them? So they're trying to get the bomb. So he is working with all these spies at Los Alamos to get this stuff out, including the Rosenbergs, who are sort of famous. When they are captured, and yes, they were totally spies, both of them, he thinks he's going to be arrested. He's totally screwed. But they don't give him up. And so he's able to sort of maintain his cover. So total side thing here because this is great. So he's still there.
You can't make this up, by the way. We are talking about a Supreme Court case that is directly on point for what we're talking about.
We'll get there eventually. So he's in New York, right? So the Russians eventually send sort of a guy who's going to be sort of his handler, that's going to be his go-between with Russia and, the United States. And so basically he'll tell the guy everything he needs to know. That guy will take the risk of transmitting stuff to the Russians. And that way, if one of them gets caught, the other one is not necessarily implicated. And the way they would do this was they had this nail on a telephone pole in like Central Park. And when the nail was there, it meant that Fischer had something to deliver. And they had all these ingenious ways of doing it, including a hollow nickel. So they had this hollow nickel, and he would roll up microfilm and put it in the nickel, right? And close it up. And then he'd put the nail, which would mean there'll be something here tomorrow. He would then leave the nickel in the drop spot. And then his accomplice, whose name I forget, would show up, get the nickel, go back to his apartment, pull out the microfiche, read it, and then transmit, to Vladimir, right? Not Vladimir, but whoever. That's what he would do, right? Well, so one day he does this. He leaves the nickel. And his accomplice gets the nickel. But as he's on his way back to his apartment, for whatever reason, he decides he wants a newspaper. And what do you know it? Newspapers cost a nickel. So, thinking he's giving the newsboy a regular nickel, he actually gives him the hollow nickel and doesn't even realize it. Takes his newspaper, gets back to his apartment. Well, the newsboy at some point drops the nickel. And when it hits the ground, it makes a strange sound. And so he starts thinking, there's something weird about this nickel, and he's messing around, and he finds the compartment. So he then ends up giving the nickel to a police officer, and it ends up getting back to the FBI. And the FBI now have this nickel with these plans that have to do with Los Alamos, and they begin this massive investigation. Like it was the hollow nickel investigation. And they're never able to figure this out until much later. But that's an example of something that happened.
Where is this story? Like, what book are you?
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
This is amazing.
It's a great story. So this incident really makes Fisher mad when his idiot accomplice is like, sorry, I think I spent your nickel on a newspaper, right? So Fisher basically sends a message to Moscow and says, you need to recall this guy as an idiot. And Moscow does it. And they recall him. And our guy, the accomplice, is like, well, I know what's going to happen when I get back to Moscow. They're going to shoot me for this. So he gets really drunk on vodka, walks into the American embassy, and defects, right? And as part of this defection, he gives up Fisher. He says, this guy's a major spy. You need to get him.
We should just end the podcast there. This is like, there's so many great spy novels right here, but this is real life, guys. Okay, get excited. Fourth Amendment's about to re-enter the chat here. So Fisher, he's hanging out in his hotel room, you know, the whole right to privacy and all. We've talked about this before, whether you have a right to privacy in your hotel room. If you're renting it and you're in it, yes, right? And he's just thinking he's having a cold one and life is good because he is doing his job right. Then there's a knock on the door. And it wasn't his buddy, the new guy who's going to get another hollow nickel. No, it is the FBI and the INS, the Immigration Services. Fisher identified himself naturally as Rudolph Ivanovich Abel. And Abel was charged and convicted with espionage and sentenced to 30 years. His appeal would go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which we'll talk about in a second. 4 years later, Abel was exchanged for a U-2 pilot, Francis Gary Powers. Abel returned to Russia a hero of the Soviet Union. In the Steven Spielberg movie, Bridge of Spies, he was actually played by Mark Rylance, who won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for the role. What a life. What an insane life. Okay, back to the Supreme Court, what you're all here for. So Abel challenged his conviction and the search of his hotel room. Importantly, though, he specifically did not challenge whether an administrative warrant was sufficient to invade a zone of privacy, such as, say, a home or a hotel. Now, this is important because although this case is very interesting, it's not definitive about this specific question as to whether you can search a home, hotel room, private place that would otherwise need a warrant with an administrative warrant. However, in this case, there are statements in the opinion that make one wonder whether or not it might be the case that the Fourth Amendment does not extend as far as one might think.
And you talk about like bad planning. So they show up, the FBI and the INS. You'd think they have an arrest warrant, search warrant, everything. But all they have is the INS with their administrative warrant because this guy is, you know, here illegally, right? He's here under false pretenses. So that's literally how they got in the door. I guess they just didn't. I mean, this is also, just to be clear, 1960, I think. I don't know if I said what year this is, but so this is a long time ago, right? So probably at the time, they didn't even think they needed a warrant. It was probably just happenstance that they had an administrative warrant because so much is going to develop after 1960. But anyways, here, this goes up Supreme Court. He's challenging various things, though not specifically the administrative warrant question. But the court did discuss whether searches incidental to being taken into custody under administrative warrant were valid. Now think about this. So an arrest warrant does not give you the right to search, right? You need a search warrant for that. But the court has said if you have an arrest warrant, there are certain searches incident to that arrest that are constitutionally allowed under the Fourth Amendment, right? We talked about this, the Luigi Mangione case. So here, the court is sort of tasked with, well, if it's just an administrative warrant, do you have those same sort of exceptions to what you might expect in the Fourth Amendment? And here's what they said. Since a deportation arrest warrant is not a judicial warrant, a search incidental to a deportation arrest is without the authority of a judge or a commissioner. As we've been discussing, that is the problem. But so is a search incidental to a criminal arrest made upon probable cause without a warrant. And under Rabinowitz, such a search does not require a judicial warrant for its validity. It is to be remembered that an INS officer may not arrest and search on his own. Application for a warrant must be made to an independent responsible officer, the district director of the INS, to whom a prima facie case of deportability must be shown. The differences between the procedural protections governing criminal and deportation arrest are not of a quality or magnitude to warrant the deduction of a constitutional difference regarding the right of incidental search. If anything, we ought to be more vigilant, not less, to protect individuals and their property from warrantless searches made for the purpose of turning up proof to convict than we are to protect them from searches for matters bearing on deportability. According to the uniform decisions of this court, deportation proceedings are not subject to the constitutional safeguards for criminal prosecution. Searches for evidence of a crime present situations demanding the greatest, not the least, restraint upon the government's intrusion into privacy. Although its protection is not limited to them, it was at these searches which the Fourth Amendment was primarily directed. We conclude, therefore, that government officers who effect deportation arrest have a right of incidental search analogous to the search permitted criminal law enforcement officers.
So this is dicta, of course. It's not necessary to the holding of the case, meaning it's just like explanation of the surrounding stuff. We've talked about dicta versus holding. Holdings are binding. Dicta is the explanation, but it shows you what the court is thinking. And it can be persuasive, just not binding. But as one 11th Circuit judge famously said, there's dicta, and there's Supreme Court dicta. The fact that the court seems to give less consideration for the Fourth Amendment rights of those here illegally is potentially important.
But there's a lot to think about here. I mean, number one, this predates the case we talked about earlier, the Fourth Amendment case about needing an arrest warrant, by 30 years. I mean, this is 1960. A lot changed about the law between 1960 and the present. And I mean, 1960 was what? 65 years ago? Am I doing my math correct? 66 now? Yeah, it's killing me. So if this is all you got, and I'll admit, when I look, somebody asked about this on Facebook, I didn't know anything about it. I started looking up this first case I saw. We talked about it some. But if this is all you got, like you would think that if this means that an administrative warrant is enough to go arrest somebody, you would see more. Like you wouldn't be citing to a 1960 case, right? Like, yes, old cases can establish things. I mean, the case we talked about for immunity is from 1890, right? I mean, that was the first immunity case, but it's not. And then there was never another immunity case, and here we are, right? It was for 135 years, 136 years. That is the law, and it's developed, and it's been interpreted by district courts, and it's been applied by various circuit courts in these ways, and it's been refined, and it's survived challenge and everything else. Here, you have this language, which gives you a really good argument. It's a good place to start, you know, a non-frivolous place to start for this, but you don't see follow-ups. You don't see a case from 1975 where they went a little bit further, and then 1985 where they reaffirmed what they said in 1960. You don't see the kind of development in the law. And this is really important. And when you see people debating legal questions, look for this, right? Like, are they basing something that seems pretty out there on one case without, and not even the holding of that one case, without any sort of development? I mean, if you're writing a brief about this, you want to be able to write a paragraph. You want to write, in 1960, the United States Supreme Court established and able that deportation officers, the standard is lower, and et cetera, et cetera. And then in 1974, this court looked at that and explained, that's how you want to write it.
And then all the circuits have kind of been percolating. The Supreme Court has yet to face the question head on, but you have all these courts adopting, you know, the use of administrative warrants for deportation searches.
But you don't see that. Instead, what you see is that in reality, for a very long time, the position of the government, and this is something you look at when you're interpreting powers, was, okay, well, we don't have the power to do this. Like, we can't go into somebody's home with one of these. We can do a lot of things with these. We can't go into somebody's home. But now they've changed that. And this is a relatively recent change, so it also has not had an opportunity to sort of go up through the courts. Now, I will say this, so far, in the one case we have, the government's approach has not worked. So on January 15th, a judge in Minnesota ordered the release of a Liberian man after ICE entered his house without a judicial warrant. They actually broke down the door in the middle of the night, went in, got him, started deportation proceedings. And that went about how you might expect, though, because here's the thing, and there's a problem that we often don't address: remedy. So let's say someone violates your Fourth Amendment rights, and enters your home tonight without a search warrant, and they find a bunch of evidence that you committed a crime, and they arrest you and charge you with it, what are you going to do? You're going to challenge that. You're going to say my Fourth Amendment rights are violated. And what's the judge going to do? It's going to say, you're absolutely right. And the remedy for that is they can't use that evidence. That's going to be the remedy. What's the remedy here? Well, they entered your home illegally and they arrested you to deport you. Well, the remedy is going to be, I'm going to release you. But here's the problem. Even though you get released, you're still here illegally. You still don't have a right to be here. So guess what they did? They arrested him the next day. And they said, okay, well, you got us on that whole going to the house thing, but you're not in your house right now. So we're going to arrest you and we're going to start deportation proceedings. So the remedy is really weak here. Even if it's the case, you can't go in, not a strong remedy. And frankly, there aren't a lot of ways. Like you might think, well, could you sue them? Well, there was something called Bivens that would allow you to sue people. Bivens is basically dead, so you can't really sue police officers anymore for this kind of thing. So there really is not much of a way forward here as far as remedy. But remedy is a separate question. We're talking about the law here, and we're curious about the law. So we've given you sort of a background, and we wanted to start giving you a background and giving you the law because something really interesting has happened in this case, which you just don't see that often, which is the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, who operates all this, wrote an op-ed about it. Wrote an op-ed about administrative warrants, sort of explaining their position on it and taking an opportunity to defend it. And we thought we'd sort of go through it and just talk about it as both sort of a persuasive document, as sort of an interesting look into how the administration thinks about this as a legal thing, and just sort of go through it paragraph by paragraph and talk about what they say. Does it make sense? Does it fit with the law? And give you the opportunity to think about it in the same way. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Sure, I'll start. But also the reason this is kind of unusual is typically there's nothing that keeps politicians, they're not politicians actually, they're executive appointees from writing op-eds. But typically you'll see press releases or maybe interviews, or you'll have like the executive communications director talk about these things rather than an op-ed. So keep this in mind because this is not a legal document. This is not a filing in court. This is really meant, I think we all know that emotions and tensions are incredibly high right now with respect to ICE and immigration. And this is essentially the department's response to people who are opposed to them. This is meant to be a persuasive document. So keep that in mind. So the the op-ed starts. The Fourth Amendment is an essential safeguard of Americans' privacy and personal liberty. Its protections must not be eroded, but they also must not be misappropriated by those seeking to subvert legitimate law enforcement. The left has done that for decades, particularly in the area of immigration enforcement.
So, one thing to note here. I used to write these, so I like going through them.
You did used to write these. I forgot about it.
Yeah. So, obviously, we start off with something everyone can agree on. Fourth Amendment, super important. Can't do anything in the Fourth Amendment. Then we have the famous but, and as has been said and isn't true, anything before the but doesn't matter, but it does, there is some truth to it, right? Now remember, this is supposed to be a persuasive document. So who are they trying to persuade, right? But the end is a sort of a political shot, right? The left has done that for decades, particularly in the area of immigration enforcement. Why do they say this? Because they have to explain why they're just now doing this, right? Remember what we just said. One of the problems with the position is you've changed your long-held position to a different position. Why? Why did you do that? So they want to say, if it hadn't been for those people on the left, and they use the left because the left and the right use that language, it's like the worst, the really unreasonable people on the left and the really unreasonable people on the right, they're doing this thing. The good people in the middle, of which we all are, of course, would never do such a thing, right? But they're having to explain it and say, basically, we would have been doing this for decades, but those people over there, they kept us from doing it, and that's why we have decided to change.
Not even on the substance. If we're just talking about this as a persuasive piece, earlier when I said think about who the audience is, it's not great when you're calling out. I think this op-ed should be directed at those who are opposed to the administration, which I think by the author's own position would be the left. So it's always weird when you're calling out the people that you are actually trying to convince here. So just as like you're the one who wrote op-eds, like Persuasive Writing 101. I'm not sure this is the most effective way because obviously this is already striking a lot of hot chords in the first paragraph and you haven't even gotten to what you're trying to persuade people about.
I'll give you my best argument in support of this.
Okay,
and I think it's not a terrible one. Okay. So who is the audience? That's a good question. The audience might not be the left. It might be people on the right or in the middle who also would disagree with this, who would think, I don't know, guys, this seems like too much of a reach. And so you're sort of pushing it off. It's like, no, it's not a reach, my friends and colleagues and co-religionists. It's that those guys that we all disagree with, those far left people, they messed this up. So y'all shouldn't be mad at us for doing this. You should be mad at them for not doing it for so long. And we're going to explain to you why this is totally cool and this is something you should support. So it may just be that the focus really is more on their own people / people in sort of the mushy middle than anybody on the left.
Which is really interesting that the outlet would be the Wall Street Journal op-ed page rather than perhaps an outlet that would reach more of that audience then.
Well, I mean, all the good conservatives read the Wall Street Journal, right? So... I mean, they didn't put it like on MSNBC, right?
We're just dissecting this, guys. This is real time.
Or anything. Okay, so they go on to say, and let me just say, if it seems like I'm being super critical, I'm not being super critical. It's always fun to do this.
And also because you did this.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to say, multiple media outlets report that immigration and customs enforcement officers have been using so-called administrative warrants in Minnesota to arrest illegal aliens with final orders of removal in their homes. This is a really weird sentence because
They're not so-called. They are administrative warrants.
Exactly. Typically, when you say something so-called, you're like knocking it, right? So-called freedom fighters, so-called Republicans, so-called Democrats, right? You're saying it's not what it is. And you're like, the media has been reporting they're using these so-called things. But you are using them, and you're about to talk about using them. So why frame it like that? But that's the way they frame it. And then they go on to say, the Department of Homeland Security welcomes the opportunity to explain this reasonable and lawful approach to the American people and federal courts. So it's like, okay, you've been saying we're doing that? Well, we're happy to explain why we're doing that.
Not that the media got it wrong. That's
exactly.
why it just says like it's just a strange way of talking about it. Again, this is not even on the substance. This is just on the communication aspect. You're like, they claim that the sky is green. We're here to tell you why, yes, the sky is green.
As a matter of fact.
You're like, wait, what? What's happening?
Let me tell you why. Yeah.
Okay. So it goes on to say, the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. True. It also provides that where a warrant is required, it must be supported by probable cause and specifically describe the places to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Most Americans are familiar with this process. If a police officer witnesses a crime, the criminal generally may be arrested without a warrant. But if the police come to a home to make an arrest, police generally must obtain a judicial warrant before entering without permission. All true. This was true. Like the first 30 minutes of our legal briefs. All true.
So that's all true. So now, what are we doing here as we're writing this? We're getting you to nod. Oh, yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yep. Because we're about to say something that if we just started off with, you might be like, whoa, right? But this is actually, psychologists have proven this. If you have a discussion with somebody or write something, if you say a bunch of stuff they're going to agree with, they get progressively more likely to agree with each point. So that's what you see happening here. Then they say, illegal aliens, however, don't have the same rights as citizens. Okay, now that is what I'm going to say called trivially true, right? It is true to a certain extent that illegal aliens don't have the same rights as citizens. For instance, the citizen can't be deported. It's one of the rights you have, right? Citizens can vote. Citizens can have a firearm. These are things that typically someone who's here illegally can't have. So, okay, that's true, but where are we going with this, right? Under federal immigration law, officers may issue an administrative warrant, which means that the probable cause finding is made by an executive branch officer rather than a judicial officer. True. This is where it all goes wrong. This is consistent with broad judicial recognition that illegal aliens aren't entitled to the same Fourth Amendment protections as U.S. citizens.
Ooh, hold on one second. We just took a hard turn. Whoo! Yeah. I was like, yes. And then, so there, if true, this is where then you follow with a paragraph of citations of that broad judicial recognition.
Should be easy.
It should be super easy. It's so broad that it started back in 1960 and then we just kept going. It just went downhill from there, right? Then each court got progressively more and more liberal, the administrative warrant, but that's not how the paragraph continues.
And let me just say, I mean, this is such a begging the question moment. I mean, this is such a we're just going to assert the whole point. I mean, this is the whole question. Whether or not that's true. And we're just going to assert it and move on.
And I get that this is not a legal filing in court. And by the way, these same people sign the legal filings in court. And so I'm not asking for a blue book style citation of all the cases, a string citation, perfectly formatted. But that is the conclusion. But you've given me nothing for the conclusion. We've started with a background of the Fourth Amendment, and then all of a sudden, the next sentence is all judicial reasoning that we've seen supports the complete about face of what we've talked about with the Fourth Amendment. You've set up all the Fourth Amendment. I agree with you on that. But this is a very hard turn without any sort of a lead up in terms of how you get us there.
And okay, and I would ask this person, if someone is here who's illegal in Omaha, they're in Omaha right now, can a police officer just walk up to them and search them? Can they do that?
They cannot.
But why not? I'm told that they don't have the same Fourth Amendment rights. You're saying they do have a Fourth Amendment right not to just be searched randomly? Because they absolutely couldn't. Now, what this person probably means, or what they're trying to say, or what the whole department's trying to say, because let's not act like one person wrote this.
In fact, probably the person who signed it didn't write it. Let's just be honest.
In fact, I'm going to go with no one in the Department of Homeland Security wrote
this.
But that's not the point. So we've talked about before the 100-mile border. So 100 miles around the border, the Supreme Court has recognized that there are exceptions to the Fourth Amendment for the purpose of immigration, terrorism, narcotics enforcement, right? So you do have fewer rights 100 miles from the border, right? To a certain extent. We did legal briefs on this. You can listen to it. But the fact that that's true, do you know what that tells you? That tells you that beyond 100 miles, you have those rights. Because if you didn't have them, guess what you wouldn't need? The 100-mile border, right? You wouldn't need the 100-mile zone because you don't have the rights. So police could just stop anybody they wanted to. And remember when we talked about that case out in California where the judge was preventing ICE officers from stopping people and checking whether or not they were here legally, and went through all the different reasons they couldn't do it. And then the Supreme Court said, no, that's not right. Well, in saying, no, that's not right, the Supreme Court cited a whole bunch of cases where these rights were violated. So, for instance, one of them was a car driving down the road, and I forget what that one's called, but the car driving down the road, and they stopped them solely because the people in the car were Hispanic, and it was outside this 100-mile zone and everything else. And the Supreme Court was like, no, you can't just do that, right? Well, why not if the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply? So this is just completely wrong. And in fact, the Supreme Court has repeatedly said that the Fourth Amendment applies to people, not citizens. So to make this assertion, this just bold assertion without any explanation, any citation whatsoever, I mean,
it's bold. And it's also unpersuasive.
Exactly. It's so unpersuasive.
Honestly, more persuasive. You have to, in any sort of a brief or any persuasive writing, you have to be the one to first name your weakness and then explain why the weakness doesn't kill your argument. Right? That is how you are persuasive. It's not to ignore. It's not to ignore that the law may not be on your side. You can even say, sure, this is dicta, but we know. Cite that there's dicta, and then there's Supreme Court dicta. And that dicta is absolutely on point here because of this, and then make your policy argument. That is so much better than just saying, nope, the law is already on our side, and I don't even have to tell you what that law is, because that's just not persuasive to anybody.
And maybe you're thinking, guys, this is the Wall Street Journal. They'd be citing cases in the Wall Street Journal. Come on. Well, that's not true because they're about to cite a case. The one you could probably predict which one it's going to be. Okay, so they say that this is consistent with broad judicial recognition that illegal aliens aren't entitled to the same Fourth Amendment protections as U.S. citizens. Broad, very broad. It is also consistent, so once again, not going to explain it. It is also consistent with the Supreme Court's admonition that the touchstone of the Fourth Amendment is whether the search or seizure is reasonable, not whether it is supported by a judicial warrant. I mean, sorta, except the Supreme Court's always said the judicial warrant is the reasonable way to do it.
And also, it's kind of hard because the case they're about to cite, they say that all of this broad judicial recognition is consistent with ABLE, but in fact, ABLE is the only judicial recognition of even discussion of this question, and it's not even on point for the holding. So it's like, it's not tangential to ABLE. This is all you got.
And watch this sleight of hand that's coming up. You're going to love this. So in ABLE versus United States, 1960, the justices recognized that there is, quote, overwhelming historical legislative recognition of the propriety of administrative arrest for deportable aliens. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about administrative arrest? Is that the issue that is at the heart of this discussion?
All the words are in there, but they don't mean the same things when they're rearranged. Yeah. Administrative is in there, but it's not talking about administrative warrants. And deportable is also in there, but that's not what we're talking about either.
Yeah. I mean, where in this quote is and in order to do that, enter a home? I mean, no one disputes that you can use an administrative warrant
to
arrest a non-citizen and deport them. No one disputes that. And that's not even the question we have here. But that's what they choose to cite.
And that's also not the fact pattern within ABLE, as we know from that very exciting storytelling we just got. So it goes on to say, while administrative warrants may satisfy the Fourth Amendment for any arrest of an illegal alien, ICE currently uses these warrants to enter an illegal alien's residence only, we're doing a lot of jumping around, when the alien has received a final order of removal from an immigration judge. So all of a sudden, we're back on our heels defending what has happened without setting up the question. This is why you know it was a sleight of hand, because they've now addressed the real problem without ever naming it in the first place. They're saying, well, you guys are saying that we use these warrants in order to go into a home. But in that same sentence, that was all one run-on sentence. It's not run-on, actually, but this is not two sentences. In the same breath, they're saying, but don't worry, we'll only do this when there's already a final order to remove the alien. But it skips over the very important question of, can you go into the home in order to do this with your administrative warrant? And it never actually addresses that question head on. So the article goes on to say, that means the alien has already seen a judge, presented his case, received due process, and been ordered removed from the country. This is also a very sneaky thing to say, because obviously the argument against using administrative warrants to violate the Fourth Amendment, right, to, unreasonable search and seizures, is when people say you can't just do this without some sort of judge ruling on this. So that is the argument. You are correct. And they are addressing that argument without addressing the argument head on, because guess what? All your constitutional rights, you don't get to have your constitutional rights be stand in for any time you're in front of a judge. So I've been before a judge before on a traffic ticket. Does that mean now you can enter my home at any time because I've had the opportunity to be before a judge on a completely separate issue? And the separate issue, of course, is the immigration issue. So this is actually very sneaky because you're not before the judge for the purposes of violating your Fourth Amendment rights. But you see how that slipped in right there, right after essentially naming the argument that people have, which is that you can't use an administrative warrant to enter a home. So these are two different things. These are apples and oranges, but it's clever because if you don't know what you're reading, you're like, well, they do get to see a judge. I see what you're saying.
And it's like, imagine a scenario in which, well, number one, there's all sorts of due process that you're given that still require an arrest warrant for somebody in your home. I mean, you could have a grand jury has returned an indictment against you, found there's probable cause to believe that you committed a crime, and yet they would still need an arrest warrant to come get you. Like, you could have situations where you've pled guilty, right? And you've been released on your own recognizance for some reason. And at some point, they decide to come arrest you. Maybe they've got more information. They still get an arrest warrant. If you don't show up for your sentencing, guess what the judge does? He issues a bench warrant. Like, just because you've received some due process in the past related to your case doesn't mean the police then have carte blanche to do whatever they want. For instance, this wouldn't give them the right to just search you if they saw you on the side of the road or in your vehicle and then charge you with something, right? I mean, it is clever, but that fact that all those things have happened doesn't go to whether or not officers can use an administrative warrant to enter a home, which is the key question that we're trying to get to.
This is still all in the same paragraph. This paragraph is really there's a lot to talk about in this paragraph. Okay, so the paragraph goes on. Aliens in this context are fugitives from justice in the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over Minnesota. This is the first time Minnesota comes up, by the way, so really just throwing a bunch of stuff in here. Has expressly recognized that administrative warrants may be used to enter a residence to capture a fugitive. Have they?
Okay.
I think it was the opposite.
They don't cite the case. You notice that, right? Because if they cite the case, they cited Abel, you think they would decide the case. If you want to read the case they're talking about, it's United States versus Lucas, 499, 5th 3rd, 769, 8th Circuit, 2007. Let's tell you what Lucas actually said. Number one, there were 13 judges on the case, right? Basically, Lucas wasn't just a fugitive. He had, as all men have the right to do, escape from prison. He had escaped from prison, so
I cannot
he's
stand
not a
by
fugitive.
this. I'm sorry, those of you who are new. I do not stand by your right to escape from prison, but
he's an escapee. Now, you can already imagine how if you're an escapee in this tyrannical system we have, you might not have the same rights as just anybody else on the street, right? You might already imagine that your privacy rights are lessened, for instance, because you don't have any privacy rights or very few in prison. If you escape, all of a sudden, are you then clothed again with all the privacy rights you had before? But anyway, they find him in an apartment, which wasn't his, the apartment he was in. Not even clear he has standing to challenge the arrest. Not even clear he has the right to privacy. Despite all of that, the case is a 5-5-3 case. 5 judges, a plurality, 5 judges said the administrative warrant issued by the warden of the prison was enough to enter the apartment and get the guy. 5 judges said, no, not good enough. 3 judges said, we're not even worried about that because he didn't have any privacy rights, so we're going to go with it's okay. So they're citing 5 out of 13 judges, a plurality decision that's not even on point to try and justify something that is a step beyond that, right? This is not on point. This is a completely different fact pattern. It is barely persuasive at all, and it's not even a majority of the court, and yet they're going with that. I mean, that should signal to you super weak, because as we said, if this is so obvious, there should be all these cases from 1960 on, and so they're searching, they're grasping for something to support them, right? So this is the best they can do.
So despite that, they make the assertion because when you say it, it becomes true, right? So they go on to say, although the law is clear, I don't know that it is. Deep state actors in the federal government have for decades told ICE officers that they may not enter a fugitive alien's home even with a final order of removal and administrative warrant.
So can we talk about this for a second? I mean, I'm not getting political here, and I don't want anybody to think I am. But I believe, and I could be wrong, and people can correct me if I'm misstating history here, but I think between 2017 and 2021, there was a similar administration to the current one. I don't know how close they were, but a similar one.
They may have even rhymed.
They might have even rhymed,
You could have even maybe worn the same shirt and no one would know the difference.
Just change the number and you're fine, right? Like, that took the same position. Not to mention the various other similarly situated political people over the last, 60 years who took the same position. Like this, just to assert that even though this is your second bite at the apple, you're still the first people who ever recognized that these deep state actors are preventing you from doing something. I mean, just to make that argument, I find that so striking. I don't know.
This is again why honestly I'm a little bit confused who the audience is, to be totally I'm not being facetious. I'm not exactly sure who the audience is. Okay, now The op-ed goes on to say, because Congress hasn't created a mechanism to obtain a judicial warrant, this meant that under previous presidential administrations, ICE would sit outside the homes of fugitive aliens, waiting for them to come outside before arresting them. Illegal aliens quickly identified this loophole. Some would openly taunt ICE officers by waving through the window or passing notes under the door.
I mean, are we really making constitutional policy based on the fact that, like, some fugitives were taunting you? Number one. Number two, yes, ICE agents will routinely sit outside homes. I've seen tons of those cases.
Yeah, all the time.
They go to a home, they sit outside, and as soon as a person leaves, they arrest them. Standard operating procedure. No big deal. Does occasionally this happen? I mean, are you seriously arguing that we should change our view of the Fourth Amendment and the Constitution based on your anecdotal examples of times this happened? I mean, did they stay in those homes forever? Is it like the airport movie with Tom Hanks and they just never left? Is that really what you're trying to tell me? Number one. And number two, let's assume this does happen. Well, maybe there are circumstances, sort of like exigent circumstances, where you can justify an exception to the rule. You can say, look, we generally have this rule. We're very reasonable about this. We're trying to protect Fourth Amendment rights. But in the specific case, we had X, Y, and Z happen. And, you know, this person was dangerous because they had a history of doing all these bad things. And so we needed to be able to go get them. Maybe you could do that. But to try and create this blanket change to the law based on this, to me at least, not convincing. I do not find this to be particularly convincing. They then go on to say, no serious country would tolerate the clear aberration of its laws or allow its national security to be jeopardized and mocked in this manner. Congress never intended the immigration laws to operate this way, and the Fourth Amendment doesn't require it. The previous approach only perpetuated the false narrative that immigration laws are second-tier laws that may be defied without consequences. Assume all that's true for a second. Remember, they've told you why they need to do this, because Congress hasn't created a mechanism. Just because Congress hasn't given you a power doesn't mean you get to create that power out of quote unquote necessity. Like, we've talked about this in so many different contexts, whether it's talking about the Chevron doctrine or administrative agencies. The number of government overreaches that are premised on, well, we got a problem and Congress hadn't done anything, so by goodness, we're going to do it. You see that all the time. I mean, think back to the student loan thing. We talked about the student loan case when that happened. You have this student loan problem. Congress didn't do anything. President Biden decides he's going to take action, and he tries to use what he sees as a creative interpretation of the law to do it a way that no one had ever interpreted the law before. Kind of seems similar, right? Nobody had ever interpreted it this way before, but we got a big problem, so we're going to change the interpretation, and we're going to say we can do this. The Supreme Court slapped him down. Said you can't do that. You can't just make it up because you have a big problem. But here, you have somebody who's basically justifying changing the rules, not because they have the constitutional power to do it, but because they have a big problem that Congress refuses to address. And that's just not the way the Constitution works.
I mean, that is the three branches of government, like intentionally for that you don't get to then just grab whatever the other side doesn't do.
And I'll say this, like, it is not the case that just because no one has ever interpreted the law in a certain way, you're wrong to interpret it that way now. That is not true. But that is an argument against you that you need to overcome with really good arguments, really good historical examples, really good constitutional interpretation. Like, the burden is on you to show why that previous interpretation was wrong. You can't just assert it. And you certainly, relying on these tropes like, well, it was the deep state and it's the left. I mean, when you do that, I just don't think you're convincing anybody. I don't see how this is going to win many friends.
All right, here we go. Let's bring it home. The American people gave President Trump a mandate to restore law and order. He was voted into office, in part by removing criminal illegal aliens from the country. Since January 2025, Secretary Kristi Noem and the DHS have rooted out deep state subversion within the federal government and realigned ICE's approach with the law. The Constitution and federal law are on our side. I still haven't been convinced how the Constitution and the law are on their side, to be totally honest.
This, once again, it's the old lawyer trope. The law's on your side, you pound the law. If the facts are on your side, you pound the facts. If neither are on your side, you pound the table, right? And if the Constitution and federal law are on your side, there should have been a whole lot more Constitution and federal law in this. It should have been, here's all the constitutional provisions. And in Madison, in Federalist, whatever, said X, Y, and Z. And, the Marshall Court interpreted this. It's like when we talked about birthright citizenship. Remember we did birthright citizenship? And you go back and you talk about sort of the whole theory of citizenship, the different ways to look at it, constitutional amendments, cases in the 1890s, how they apply to now, changes in the law. I mean, that's what you're wanting to do, right? You want to give some, you don't want to just say, look, we got a big problem with people who are here illegally and birth tourism. These are big problems. So we're going to change the rules. And it doesn't matter that nobody's ever seen it this way because we got a big problem. Constitution law is on our side. So therefore you should just agree with us. Like, that's not a winner. And at some point soon, this is all going to be before courts and judges. And this ain't going to cut it. If you want to make this argument, I hope it improves dramatically between now and when the first judge sees this argument, and not a district judge. I mean, we all know, how district judges are, and like, there's a lot of emotions and everything. And you get up to the 8th Circuit and Supreme Court, district judges in other parts of the country, you better have something more than this, because this, to me, and maybe you guys disagree, I don't find this to be particularly convincing.
I think I made my views clear too.
And I mean, I hate to be critical because it's always hard to write an op-ed, particularly when you're writing something you don't have a lot. I mean, we went through the law at the beginning. I think it's pretty obvious. I'm not saying this isn't a potentially winning argument. I think you probably could thread a needle here where you say, look, yes, generally speaking, the Fourth Amendment applies with the same force to people who are here illegally as anything else. But because deportation sort of runs parallel and doesn't intersect with criminal enforcement, you really need to view administrative warrants as parallels to a judicially issued arrest warrant in the criminal sense. In a criminal case, we're going to arrest someone and put them in prison and take away their liberty, maybe for their entire life. Yes, you need a judicially enforced arrest warrant. Here, we're simply looking to deport someone, which is a civil remedy. Even though the courts have not really addressed this, they've been clear that this is different. There's a fundamental difference here. And so we should be allowed to use these warrants in the same way when it comes to entering someone's home to effectuate that end. I mean, that is not a terrible argument. It's a non-frivolous argument. You can make that argument and maybe we'll even be successful. But if you just act like, well, of course we can do it because it's obvious, man. It's the law. Like, no, you're going to lose. They got to take it seriously. You got to take it seriously. I guess that's the thing. You have to take seriously the opposition.
And look, being a lawyer you're not always going to have like the side with all of the citations and all the case law. That's like the practice of law, right? What makes a really good lawyer is one who is able to craft the best argument, and the best arguments, in my opinion, there's lots of different ways to litigate, lots of different ways to judge. But in my view, and I think the winning view is always being the first to name your weakness and convincing me how you overcome it. Because then I trust you if I'm the judge listening. That is where, when I don't think you're hiding the ball, this is just like honestly, all these sleights of hand make me kind of angry. Because I'm like, okay, even if I wanted to agree with you, now you've just pissed me off, to be honest. Because there is an honest argument to be made. And this isn't it. Because you're thinking very little of the reader when you're doing all these sleights of hand of like, they've been before a judge on a completely different issue. I don't care if you're talking to non-lawyers here. We know this is not the issue at hand, and you never named the problem in the beginning. These are things that this should not be in a brief at all. Whoever wrote this op-ed, again, I don't think is anyone at DHS who necessarily wrote it. They put their name on it, which I think maybe they should have read it a little more closely before they did that. But this would not fly. If I were a judge and I were king for a day, queen for a day, would not fly. And I don't think this is the best way to litigate because we have a lot of lawyers or, law students listening to this. I hope this is like helpful for you to see how to craft good arguments and how to write persuasively and not persuasively.
Alice is 100% right. And I hope you guys out there who are lawyers listen to that. It's a great practice tip. Own your weaknesses, own them and hit them head on. And let me just say this, never say the law is clear if it's not clear. Here, I mean, you've changed the law. Even if you're right, you still change the approach. And you need to recognize that you're taking this bold action, right? Because it is the law. But
again, even if you knew nothing about this and we didn't give you all this background about Abel, the first thing that should jump out at you, and that is not addressed why this is not persuasive writing, in my view, is when you say, this is well settled. It goes all the way back to 1960, but we just did an about face this year. You're like, what happened for like the last 60 years? If it was so clear, why did we just do an about face? Are you blaming it all on the deep staters? Like all of them? Because the deep staters, then that's like 60 years of lots of different administrations on both sides of the aisle. Like, this is just not comporting with me. Again, this is if I even want to agree with you. I have a lot of questions. And we've always said, lawyers, the only thing we trade on is our credibility and our reputation. And it travels with you from case to case. It doesn't just stay within one case. Sure, you can lose complete credibility in one case. We talk about this in a lot of the trials we've followed, some people who we think are not honest brokers in the law. This is not great. This is why we take these oaths to our profession, because your credibility really is all you have. Your reputation is all you have, which is why a lot of you out there, when we cover cases like Karen Reed or West Memphis or Adnan, try to attack our credibility as like, how do you live with yourself? And I'm like, I sleep great at night because I am the same lawyer I am on the podcast as I am when I litigate, because there is no separation when it comes to your credibility as a lawyer. So I kind of went on like a rant there, but it's just true.
So I guess the deep state's gone. We got rid of the deep state.
I think it's gone. And apparently maybe we were part of it.
It must be gone, because otherwise they couldn't do this, because the deep state would have stopped them, right?
I don't know why they couldn't do it in 2017.
The deep state was still there. It took a while. Swamp was deep.
And it didn't come back in the interim. It didn't
come back. No. So. Anyway.
Well, anyways, guys.
It's an interesting legal question.
It is a great, interesting.
We'll see how it goes. And I bet this ends up in the Supreme Court at some point, because I think they are going to do this. They've already done it. Now, one thing that could keep this in the Supreme Court is, like we said, enforceability, redressability, remedy. Like that one guy, he wins his case. The government doesn't have to appeal because they just arrest him the next day. And that's perfectly legitimate, by the way. If you think that sounds weird, like, in fact, it's kind of like if you have an illegal search and you can come up with an independent way you would have gotten that information, it still comes in. It's kind of like that, right? Here, if you're here and you can't be, and you have an order of deportation, then you're deportable every moment you're here. And whenever ICE can get you into custody, they can deport you. So, in this case, that arrest was found to be invalid, so they had to vacate that arrest. But it doesn't mean, like, he can never be arrested again. He is now immune from arrest for all time. No. So, all right.
Well, this has been really fun and feisty.
We should do more of these op-eds.
Feistier than I intended. I thought this was going to be like a quick 30-minute, post-ICE day talk about something easy, but look at us going an hour and a half yet again. Guys, thank you so much. No, thank you for sending us these questions. It's not personal. Thank you for sending us these interesting articles and for asking these questions. And I hope you learned something today. And I hope that you're able, what I always hope, our little slice of the internet or podcast world, is that you're able to learn something about really hot topics that typically emotions are too inflamed to actually have good discussions about. I hope you feel like you can come ask us these types of questions and that we can give you the information to then think for yourself, because at bottom, we don't want you to be just clicking on clickbait. We think it's incredibly important for like the continuation of our democracy is that we are all educated and able to have these thoughtful conversations.
And I always hope that if you listen to us, you're like armed when you go out to have these conversations, whether you think you would agree with us on the substance or not. Like maybe you think that administrative warrants, absolutely, somebody should be able to use those to go into a home and to arrest somebody. But now you're armed with the arguments. You're armed with the arguments for, you're armed with the arguments against, and really anything someone brings up to you in your life or on Twitter, you've already heard. And you can make those arguments. That's always our goal. And I hope that you guys get something out of it. Whenever we address these, a lot of these are controversial and some of you just get mad every time we talk about it, but that's fine. We're always going to be here. So you guys can always ask us anything and we'll do our best to answer your questions.
Exactly. Well, this has been a long one, so we won't answer a question today. But if you leave a 5-star review, you can ask us a question about anything. It could be about immigration. It doesn't have to be, guys. It could be just about our favorite ice cream flavors as well. And you can let us know what you think at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. And we're all over the social media. Join our fan-run Facebook group, The Gallery, which has great discussions about this and many other topics. Brett, is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off on our very short legal brief?
Just happy to see you always, Alice. Always a joy.
Same. Well, guys, until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Just putting a third pillow up. It's precarious. I'm not gonna lie. Oh, it just fell.
You put a third pillow up.
It's impossible. Let me try to move everything over to see if I can fit a third one on.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hold on.
Still working on Alice's new recording space.
Oh, got my cord. Okay, well, we're gonna work with this. Hi.
Remember, into the microphone.
I'm trying. I will. Thank you.
TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
What? This is the mindset. Free. This is the mantra.
Free.
This is the mindset.
With movies like Joe Dirt, Pixels, and 50 First Dates. This is awesome. And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free.
Huzzah!
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
You're welcome.
They put hot honey sauce on the snack wrap? McDonald's outdid themselves again. The classic snack wrap we all know and love, paired with the sweet heat of hot honey sauce? Just what we needed to make it even more perfect. You know the drill. So go to McDonald's and try it today.